So I wanted to talk a bit about struggle and exploring the need behind struggle and resistance and suffering and dissatisfaction, the need to solve a problem. All of these things are closely linked together, kind of all the same flavor. But the one thing we often don't think to look at is the belief behind it, that this is my struggle right now, and I do need to solve a problem. That's kind of something we never stop to question. That what if struggle isn't really necessary? Sure, conditions might not be perfect. Conditions might be very challenging. Conditions might be difficult and uncomfortable. But there's an added layer that we put on top that makes things much more difficult than they need to be. And sometimes we need to see how uncomfortable we make ourselves before we even realize that it's happening. So, often we need to get to this place of just struggling so much with life before we can even open to the idea that struggle isn't necessary. So the best way to explore this is to set aside some time to stop. Some time where it is clear that struggle isn't necessary. If we set aside 10 minutes and say that I don't need to do anything right now. I don't need to make anything different than it is. We set that intention beforehand. I really can't get this wrong. There's really nothing that I need to fix. There's no doing that needs to happen in a period like now. And if we ever practice this, we can see that the habitual tendency of the mind is to still create some kind of struggle. So we can see in that kind of exploration that it's a tendency of our mind. It's like a habitual conditioning, a real strong habit force. But that can make it obvious to us, as if we sit and we say, there's nothing I need to do right now. And then we see how, even when we do that, the mind looks for a problem to solve. And we can see how unnecessary that is. And then we can, it can take some practice, but we can explore a question we normally don't ask is, what if there's no problem to solve? You're not really giving the mind much there. And then you can see that anything that comes up is just a thought. Anything that comes up is just a thought, whether it's mind wandering, whether it's confusion, whether it's fear, whether it's frustration, annoyance, doubt, whatever's happening, it's wrong. That's just a thought. What if that thought is just arising now and doesn't really refer to anything? It's just in appearance and experience. But we really have to kind of not get too pulled in by the story of the thought. That's what keeps us believing that struggle is necessary. Thought comes and we get caught up in its content before we can even realize that it's just a thought. So along with this comes an invitation to trust, because that's maybe why we struggle so much, is because we're afraid to really let go and trust. It's the last thing the mind wants to do, because it can't come up with a logical reason to let go. It's kind of going in the opposite direction that the mind wants to go. Mind wants to understand, it wants to know, it wants to conceptualize, it wants to find the solution, it wants to find the formula, it wants to find the problem, it wants to solve it, it wants to look for the next problem, it wants to get better, it wants to do this, it wants to do that. And when we say, no, there's no problem, there's, all this struggle. It's more habit force, and it's an avoidance of feeling. That's why we play this game with ourselves, is because there are things that we have learned to not feel through whatever conditioning, traumatic past events, minor trauma, major trauma, emotional repression, whatever it is. But when we start to practice the other way, the opening way of, well, now it is okay to feel anything. Now, it doesn't matter what the mind says. I'm inviting everything into my experience. I'm offering up my experience as a space for the things that I haven't been able to feel. Sure, maybe there was a time when I couldn't feel complete helplessness because of whatever the circumstances, but when we sit, it is a permission to feel, because we can see that it's just innocent arising in experience, an innocent expression that feels so kind of scary because of all the tendencies to not feel. But if we remind ourselves that, okay, I'm sitting here now, and whether there's fear, whether there's shame, whether there's whatever, what if I don't just believe it and get identified in the way that I usually do? What if I just stop struggling? What if I trust this moment so fully that I no longer need to worry about what comes next? What would I have to feel? And can I be willing to see where, often this will bring straight to the surface some kind of thing that we usually cling to, something like, oh, but now I'm going to have this thought that I don't like. Or this sensation. But what would it be like to feel from pure curiosity without the label of good and bad, of pleasant and unpleasant? What if there's just experience and there's nothing that's wrong? And trust yourself. Don't trust me. All I can do is invite you to trust yourself, to trust your own present experience. Your own innocence. And if you're this far, then there's something, if you've gotten this far and you haven't turned this off because it's too boring, it's because that part of you that wants to let go, even if the mind is doubting a million times a second, it's just noise. But there's a part of you that really does want to let go and just trust beyond thought. Trust, no matter whether the mind's saying, oh, this is stupid, I can't do this, but no. There is something that knows that it can let go. But we need to give it space. We need to practice shifting our attention out of the endless chatter, the endless pushing and pulling and controlling and fixing and managing and being somebody, being this, holding onto that identity. Exhausting. So that's why meditation, sitting, feeling, being is so powerful, because we're orienting to the space that we usually don't. Even if we don't know what it is we're doing, even if it feels like every time we meditate we're doing it wrong, it's making a difference. It's more about the kind of heart intention behind this, like a part of us that really is willing to sit and try to find a way beyond the mind. That will lead us to wherever we need to go. And it becomes clearer the more we do this. So I invite you to give yourself that space if it resonates at all, if a part of you says, yes, I want to let go. I want to know who I am without a thought. I want to know myself without the label of myself. So when we let go of struggle, then another opportunity can come to the surface. But we have to explore, or it can be helpful to explore letting go of struggle and seeing that when we're struggling, we're just getting bound up in thought. So just stopping and seeing that's a thought. But what's what's watching the thought. So be brave and trust that you don't need to fight anymore. You don't need to control. Trust yourself. But not the mind, not the thoughts. Practice seeing beyond that. And it's okay if it's tough. It's okay if it feels feels like it's not working. Just keep at it. Can't make you trust anything, but I can tell you that for me, it worked better than anything the mind could ever come up with.